This is the Citrus Experience podcast, brought to you by Citrus Men. We're passionate about growing premium grafted citrus trees and helping you on your growing journey. Whether you're a seasoned gardener or an emerging green thumb, this series is for you. We share expert advice, insider knowledge and practical tips you can apply because we know and grow citrus.
Hello and welcome to the Citrus Men podcast. I'm Susan Burns.
And I'm Gary Isles.
And in this episode, we're going to be explaining how citrus take care of themselves. We're going to dive deep into the potting mix and discuss growing citrus in containers and perhaps how you can bring the citrus back from their store. Hello, Gary Isles.
Hello, Susan. Yes, we're going to delve into looking after those trees and if they're in a bad state, bring them back. They're very resilient. That's what will be the highlight of today. They're a very resilient plant.
Yes. And I don't think it's any surprise to our listeners that a citrus can actually survive without us, but they will thrive and do so much better and produce bountiful buckets of fruit if we look after them and nurture them properly. But you have to get it right from the start, Gary, don't you? It starts with a beautiful tree.
Starts with that plant. Starts with your purchase of the initial plant. That's right. So get the plant right, and you're well on the way. We're big proponents of grafted plants, and that just gives you so much more flexibility for the plant for the future.
Yes, I think sometimes people are not sure really when they're paying. It's not a lot of money, as we've discussed previously, but often it's what you don't get, what you can't see, not what you don't get, but what you can't see when you receive that plant, i.e. being grafted and being budded onto a beautiful selected rootstock, which we'll talk about actually in next week's episode. But it's also how we prepare the tree, how you frame up the tree, Gary. I think this is a nice point for us to go into. We've had some customer feedback about why we trim the tree so much when they arrive as a branched headed tree. Could you explain?
Yes. Yeah. Well. Yes. I'll start with what you said. With the part we don't see. You don't see the roots. The roots is where is most important. And grafted plants on a rootstock. That's the way to start. So make sure you've got a grafted plant. Would be our first piece of advice, and then going into the training and the framing of the tree. So in a normal orange, mandarin, lemon plant that you receive through Citrus Men with in the 165 millimeter pot, then those plants are staked and trimmed to give you a base frame for the tree to grow on. So there'll be a stake to bring the stem up straight from the graft, and then above that, then we'll branch the tree out to give you that nice frame for the tree to support itself during its life. So you're getting a tree that's shaped and ready to go. So there is a lot of work in that. So we have to tend to those trees many times to get that basic frame. Time and time again, as the tree grows, then it flushes out, and we remove some of the shoots and keep it going how we want. So that gives you a nice framework for your tree. And then if we look at the dwarf line of the pipsqueaks, then because they're dwarf, we bring them down lower and bush them out lower. So they'll have a central leader, but we'll let them bush out from just above the graft, because they're a smaller plant, and you're not looking for that great big the height that you would get in a normal one. So you get a smaller, bushier plant, but still it's a frame for that tree to grow and produce its fruit.
Yes, and that's the really important factor. It's the framework, and that, if people can imagine, that's what's going to grow up and thicken up and become the big trunk and the body of the tree, with that nice head that's been developed, and away they go. It's sort of like just getting bigger and bigger. All the work has been done. It's set up. It's ready for you. I always find it extraordinary, and it's a bit of a insider secret when people are buying plants in a nursery. If you let the customer choose the plant, they'll choose the worst plant because they're looking for height. They're looking for size. But what we're trying to get you to rethink, it's what you can't see. It's all that beautiful cutting back and pushing the roots down into the ground and making a big firm root system, a lovely caliper or trunk, and a framework for that tree to grow on. So size isn't everything. It's about the shape and all the hand trimming and cutting that's gone into making the perfect plant for you to have success when you get it home.
Yes, that's right. Our eye looks for something different than people from the public, simply because that's just a natural thing to look for size. But if you look for shape, and a good root zone, you can't see that obviously, but sometimes when you pick the plant up, you can feel that it's got a good root zone, and then you're ready to go.
Yes, good advice. So let's start with the pots, Gary. I know we have just discussed that before in previous episode, but just so it's crystal clear, the plant is arriving to you, a Citrus Men citrus, in a 165 ml or perhaps a 150 ml pot. And then what's the natural progression? Once you get it home and you're ready to pot up, what are we going to be suggesting to people?
Okay, well, we're talking about containers now, not into the garden. So you're looking at a pot that 30 centimetres, 40 at the most, is a good size to go into. That gives you a nice volume of mix for the roots to grow out into, but it's not too big. It's you don't want to be watering and feeding a great bulk of mix that the roots are going to take forever to get out to. So you go to that 30 to 40 centimetre size pot, gives you plenty of time. They'll live in that volume of mix for quite a few years, and fruit and all that.
Yes.
So sometime down the track, if you want to go to a bigger pot than that, then it's quite easy to take it out of that pot, give the roots a bit of a bash around to loosen them up, and then put it into a bigger pot. But I wouldn't go any bigger than that with your first container, and it'll last you for quite a few years in that size.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what people need to consider also is that the plant will expend energy filling the pot. So you're going to get a bigger plant if you don't over-pot it, because it can fill up that pot and then start to grow quickly and get away. Whereas if it's trying to fill up a big pot full of potting mix, it keeps the plants sort of smaller or not as progressive or vigorous as it could be. And I think the other important consideration, Gary, is not to overfill your pot. Leave a 3 centimetre, 5 centimetre space from the top of the pot to the top of the potting mix, so that you can really fill that pot up with water. Your fertiliser isn't going to roll off. That's another important consideration. It's not over pot, but pot up to the top. Don't pot up to the top rim of the pot. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll wash that mix out, and you need, particularly in the early stages, you need to wet the whole mix so those roots get right out to the edge. So give it a good water, and to do that, you need to have that little gap on the top so the water, you can fill it and let the water soak through.
Yeah, and drain away. Make sure the pot is draining.
And drain away. Yeah. And while we're on that, Susan, I think too that the mix it dictates the drainage. Putting rocks or anything in the bottom won't change the mix. It's the mix that drains. Throwing rocks in the bottom of the pot is it won't help you at all, because if the mix isn't going to drain properly, it's not going to drain properly if you put rocks under it.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it also, it's not crazy. I've done it myself, but it can harbour little insects as well. Those little rocks are a nice little spot for little critters to hop in and sort of overwinter and hide away. And it's not best practice. So, yeah, don't put rocks in your pot. And what about pot type, Gary? Do you have a favourite? I quite like terracotta, but what do you think?
Yeah, look, it's terracotta's traditional, and it ages and it gets a certain look about it. It is heavy and it can fracture. So yeah, I'm sort of lean a bit to the easier side of maybe a plastic terracotta. That's I know that's not traditional, but it's it's easy for people to if you've got a balcony and you've got to carry the pot up three levels, then the weight of the pot starts to be a consideration.
True.
But there's many choices. The wooden half barrel. I often use the half barrel as a size to describe, but the timber does age, and and some of the timber pots that are out there aren't like wine barrels, so the timber doesn't last. Yes, you'd have to be aware of all the different choices, but there is a myriad, to use the word of that.
Yeah, it's what probably just suits your decor, importantly. You have to have something or suits your style. And you're right, terracotta has got a lot of issues with it. It does break and it can look slimy, but I love it because it tends to breathe. It's a natural product. And I always, old-fashioned me, I just think plants grow better in terracotta, but they dry out a lot quicker. Plastic has that advantage. The plant's not going to dry out as quickly. But yeah, look, there's a lot of choices out there, and it's more important to get the size right. But don't, as we've discussed before, avoid those self-watering pots. Danger. Do not use.
Yes, that's a pet hate. The watering is the overwatering with the self-watering pots is basically what we think.
Yes, and look, they're great for indoor plants. Perfect, it makes sense, but not for your outdoor citrus. And actually, that's an interesting point, Gary. We do get asked often, can citrus grow indoors? And I have seen them grow indoors. What are your thoughts around growing a citrus indoors in a pot? Of course. Yeah,
I mean, it of course. It comes down to a number of factors. It comes down to light and care and all that. But if we think back into history, then the orangeries of the past that's what they've done in climates like the one at Berceau in France. Gets too cold for citrus in the winter, so they bring them inside, and that's happened in various places around the world. So that's a good lesson if you are in those sorts of areas. You can bring them inside in the winter to protect them, but I think you still need to put them out into the sunshine and the weather when it's warmer. So it can be done. Like you, I've seen it. I've seen the small kumquats and calamondins, calamancies used inside. And if they've got a reasonable amount of light, it can be done. But it's not their natural area, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah, and look, it's a fantastic thing. I don't know if it's an Australian thing. In Europe, they're much better at getting a fabulous plant and using it as we would use a bunch of flowers. They get a plant and they use it indoors and it survives very well. And there's lots of examples of that. And citrus is one of those. They sell them in fruit, looking fabulous, and people have them indoors for a festive occasion or for a few months, but then it goes out or it gets thrown out. But if we got into that same mentality where if we had a pot of citrus and it was looking divine, there's no reason why you wouldn't bring that inside and show it off in a nice light spot for a few weeks and then gradually take it back outdoors. But if it's indoors for a long period of time trying to grow, as you say, it's not its natural environment and it's never going to really thrive like it would if it was outdoors.
Yeah. Like I think that's exactly right. You bring it in when it's looking good, We've seen in fact, I know the person that grows them for Europe, that sells those beautiful calamantis into the European market with 4 or 5 fruit on, and they use as a great display inside in the cooler months.
Yes, gorgeous. I don't know if that will ever happen in Australia because we're so cautious about, or we're just not able to with biosecurity. Again, we've discussed this in a previous issue, but we can't really send trees with fruit on around Australia like we can send, Citrus Men can send trees all around Australia except for Western Australia. But that would be a limitation, of course.
Yes, some areas, because of the commercial citrus in those areas, they don't want fruit coming into that area that might have fruit fly. So some areas, even if we've got fruit on our plants, we have to take it off when we send it.
So we'll just go back. We've got our little citrus tree now growing happily in its pot. And again, we're repeating ourselves, but we'll just quickly say, because we need to bang people's head against the wall gently, ever so gently. What are they needing to do? We've got them top quality potting mix. We've got the right size pot, and now it's about
position. It's about their fertilising and their watering.
Yeah, the golden rule. So pretty simple, isn't it?
Yep, it's pretty simple. If we just take fertilising to start with, there's always instructions on the container of how often, and then because it varies so much with your length of release on some things. So just take note of that and how often you need to keep the plant fertilised. And we always recommend our citrus booster, which is a great pickup for the plant. You can use that as often as you like, really. Not every day, of course, but every monthly or something like that, you gives it a boost. But
it's fantastic.
Keep the speed up.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
If you use a top quality premium potting mix, which is obviously what we recommend, then that will have some a nice amount of nutrition in to get the plant off and running. So, that's one of the reasons why we recommend to use the premium potting mix, because it gives you a head start.
Yes. And I think too, people often, you're out of the gates and your tree's growing well and then it sort of slows up. Often that's because the fertiliser in the potting mix is finished, it's released, and you need to top up. As I always say, citrus are gluttons. They do need a lot of food. That's why we love the citrus booster, because it's very safe. It's especially in the container. It's I don't want to scare people, but if you over fertiliser with a prill fertiliser, it's possible. But with a liquid fertiliser like citrus booster, it's very gentle and you're very, very safe.
It's very gentle. And what I would like to say to everybody is, particularly in containers, with your fertiliser, if it's not an organic fertiliser and if it's not a controlled release fertiliser, so in other words, it's a fertiliser that's immediately available, be very, very careful. Those the fertilisers that are immediately available is that you can overdo it in a container. So our recommendation is, yes, use our citrus booster. Use the anything organic is fine because it's slow to the plant, or controlled release. So timed release fertilizers are all right. But if outside of that, if you've got something like just normal citrus fertilizer, it's fine in soils, but in a potting mix, it can be immediately available too much to the plant. So just be very gentle with that sort of fertilizer if you do use it.
Yeah, sure. Which is a nice segue into discussing when things do go wrong with the citrus in a pot, and it's probably more likely to happen in a pot than in the ground. Equally, citrus are amazing at coming back to life with some good, easy treatment. So let's discuss some
Yep.
things that. So, say overwatering is probably the hardest thing to bring back. So, what would an overwatered
Yep.
tree look like, apart from the fact that you've clearly got soggy soil in it?
That's right. Well, just to start at the other, if you what we're just talking about with fertilizer, if you overdo that fertilizer, then you can get the leaves will drop overnight.
Overnight, yes.
So just to separate that from overwatering. Overwatering is more like the tree will start to look poorly. It won't be dropping all its leaves. It might start to drop some of the older leaves, and you might find it seems a bit unstable in the pot. And the reason for that is if they're overwatering, then the roots will be starting to disappear. And that's because overwatering means there's no or very little air in the potting mix, and it's the air and the air spaces where the roots grow.
Mm.
So you need to make sure that you're not overwatering, because that's harder for the plant to recover from, because it's got to regrow the roots, and if it's overwatered too much and the roots start to die off, you could almost pull the plant out because it's been so boggy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the hardest thing to come back from, but it can recover. But if you see the plant looking a bit out of shape, not quite as green and luscious as it normally does, don't go and grab the hose and give it a water. Just have a look. Have a scratch around in the potting mix. Maybe poke your finger in one of the drainage holes in the bottom, and then that'll soon tell you if it's really wet and boggy in the bottom. Well, okay, well, maybe lay off the water for a while, let it dry out a bit, let those roots start to grow again.
Yeah. So also, it's an important consideration there that people check that the plant is draining. That might be the issue. Why it's not that you're giving it too much water. It's just that the water might not be able to move away. So it's just blocking up there like a blocked pipe, basically. So make sure sometimes those little pot feet, I really love them because make sure that then the water can drain away, but also you get that air circulation around, which is sort of like what we call air pruning of the roots, and it just keeps everything tidy and nice in the container. So they're an excellent aid when you've got plants in a pot, the pot feet.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, yeah. The mix needs to drain. It needs to stay moist, but it needs to drain away.
Yeah. So on the opposite end of the scale, if you're a bit like, oh, whoops, forgot to water the plants again, and they're dry. Actually, they're probably easier to bring back when they're dry than when they're too wet. So what's a dry plant looking like?
Yeah, the leaves will be cupped. Might even again start to drop. But basically, when you see the leaves cupped, and any flush, if there's flush on the plant and it's droopy, that's a pretty good indication. But yeah, retrieving a dry plant's a lot easier. So I think sometimes the hardest thing is to get the mix wet again. If the plant's really dry, sometimes it's difficult to get the potting mix wet. So that may take you 2 or 3 good soaking waters to get that mix nice and moist again, because sometimes it'll because it's so dry, it doesn't accept the water, so it repels the water almost. So I have to try a few times. Yeah, hydrophobic, that's the word I'm looking for. So it will if you just keep at it, get it re-wet, and once you're done that, you go back to normal watering. But yeah, you might go away for 2 or 3 weeks and no one waters your pots. You can bring them back, but you might have to give them a couple of good waters, and then you're away again.
Would you suggest, Gary, to give the plant a bit of a clip over so that it's not got as much frame or foliage to try and bring back to life? Is that something you'd suggest?
Well, generally, if any sort of rejuvenation of the plant, I would recommend a light prune normally, and then if there's something more severe, then we can go for a heavy prune. But a light prune tidies it up, gives it a bit of an idea that, it's time to start growing. So, light prune, keeps it in the shape you want it, keeps it tidy, and helps it come back. Now, if you're looking, if something's really, had a hard life, if a plant's had a very hard life, then I would often say, well, let's give it a heavy prune.
Yes, sure. I think while we're talking about perhaps pots and citrus in pots getting dry, often you'll hear people say, I don't need to water today because it rained. Well, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And because the citrus tree, it is like an umbrella in the pot. So it's going down, those leaves are creating little funnels to drip water down to what we call a drip line. Can you explain that, Gary? The drip line?
Yeah. The drip line is basically that. It's where the outer part of the canopy drips down to the ground, and that's and in the garden soil, then that's fine. That picks it up. But in a pot, that generally sheds it off the top of the pot. And in a rain event, you're really just getting the water that will run down the stem of the plant. 5 mil shower of rain won't water your pots very well. So don't think it's rain today. If you've had half an inch or 12 mil, then it's probably had a nice water. But anything much less than that, don't think that you let off watering.
Yeah,
so
no.
leave however you want to hand water, or whether you have a little irrigation system, leave it run in those situations.
Yeah, sure. And I suppose the other common thing we see is that when plants are looking poorly, losing condition, it's often because they're hungry. So how would we identify that? Apart from the fact that that you haven't given the plant anything to eat.
Yes, that's right. Well, generally the plant will be yellow. It'll start to yellow off. Now, there is a bit of, older leaves will yellow off and fall off. That's quite natural. And in the cooler months, sometimes the roots can't pick up all the elements, and you do see some patterning. But general yellowing over the whole plant is a pretty good indication that it's hungry. Give me some tucker.
I think too, sometimes people go, my citrus tree is doing really well. Look at all these amazing flowers, and it's a little hungry tree, all yellow, all full of flowers, because it thinks it's going to die. It's an amazing trick, isn't it? Mother Nature, she goes, I better make a lemon with some seeds so I can propagate myself. So sometimes there's that. It's not always a sign that things are good.
Oh, yeah. Undernourished trees will still flower, and that only makes it worse because the flowering and the fruiting just takes nutrients. So, yes, they are, as we've often said, they're gross feeders. So keep up the nutrition; they'll survive, and give you some fruit without, if you just let them go. But they'll be so much nicer to look at and perform so much better with just a small bit of care.
Yeah, great. So in wrapping up, Gary, we know that citrus are easily recovered and you can bring them back from basically death's door. That's not difficult, but there must be a point where we have to, fold the cards, say that's it. What do you say to that? When is that point?
Yeah, well, I think yes, there is probably a point where you say, okay, I'm better with a new plant, and I think that what we spoke about a little earlier was something that's been overwatered, that's been in a really boggy mix, and the roots have all dropped off. By the time you repair that situation and the plant starts to get going again, you may be better. If you discover that it's a really boggy mix and the plant's not done well and the roots are disappeared, then perhaps then you could say, okay, well, let's get rid of that mix. Let's get some lovely, fresh, new premium mix, and let's get a nice new plant and let's go again. And I know why that one didn't perform. It was, it was in a bog all the time. So that's one situation. The other one, possibly an old tree that's got borer, because a poorly tree will just attract trouble.
Yes.
And sometimes borers do like to attack trees that aren't doing well. And sometimes the borers there got right into the internal parts of the plant, difficult to control. That you may be better in that situation to get rid of the one you got, get rid of the borers and start again. Put a bit of fresh, if you're in the garden, a bit of fresh garden loam and go with it that way, or fresh mix, and away you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But in general, they're very forgiving.
Yes, they are. And look, and there's no shame in things happen and start again. We want you to have great success, and you will. We're always learning all the time, and citrus is such a wonderful thing to grow. So look, as Gary said, if you're struggling and the tree's struggling, just start again. The investment of time and fertiliser and water is probably not worth it. We've got beautiful selection, gorgeous things on Citrus Men for you to have a go at. So, start again, start afresh. It's like a bad cake that you made. Just sometimes just put it in the bin and start again. So Gary, super interesting as always. We could talk about citrus forever, but we'll have to stop now. Until next time, when we're going to talk about something people love, rootstocks, and the importance of a strong root system, and why buying grafted matters. So it'll be rootstocks and interesting drilling down on it. So I'll look forward to talking to you then, Gary.
Me too, Susan. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening. For resources and contact details relevant to this episode, please see the show notes. Subscribe to Citrus Experience so you know when the next episode goes live, and follow Citrus Men on social media for more great content.